Good afternoon, Denis. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Albania.
Great pleasure to be virtually in Albania, at least.
So I want to dive right in. Now, we connected via Twitter on the topic of Kosovo, and I did some digging, and I read about your book, Why Kosovo Still Matters. And when I was reading, I didn't have time to read the whole book in, the couple of days since when we spoke. That's my disclaimer. But from what I could understand, you were making a call for policymakers in the West to re-engage with the Western Balkans before it's too late. Now, I read this and I thought, well, this is what I'm asking for as well. But then I saw that the book was written around 12 years ago, and I thought, hold on. So something that you wrote 12 years ago is just as poignant now as it was then. And I thought, well, that's not great. That's not a great sign, is it? So my first question to you is, you made these calls in the book 12 years ago. Have they listened? Where are we now?
We're not any further forward. Imagine if in West Europe about 1958, France and Germany weren't recognizing each other. There wasn't the beginnings, laying the foundations of the European community. Countries were hostile. Countries wouldn't talk to each other. There are endless accusations, which could well be justified in the 1950s about corruption in many governments. And so there was just no normal West Europe. I mean, that would have been a gift then to Stalin and the Soviet Union. And just as the West Balkans disarray, the failure of Europe to understand what needs to be done in the region is a great help to Mr. Putin. And it's just quite remarkable. The European Union is there to bring in the countries coming out of dictatorship, Greece and Spain and Portugal coming out of fascist dictatorship in the 1970s and then joining the European community in the 1980s. The countries of Eastern Europe, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, others, including Bulgaria and Romania, again coming out of a communist dictatorship and still very primitive, a lot of internal corruption, but at least joining the European Union. And here we are, though, we're still saying to Albania, we're saying to Kosovo, we're saying to North Macedonia, saying to Serbia, no, go and become perfect, become little Switzerlands overnight, and then maybe we'll start talking to you. And it really is a great failure, I think, of the European project.
Now, your book was called Why Kosovo Still Matters, and just for people who haven't read it, why does Kosovo still matter then and now? What's its significance?
It represented the worst moments of the 10 years of the Milosevic wars against all his neighbours, the ethnic cleansing, Srebrenicas, the tortures, the death squads, the corruption, buying Western politicians, including, I'm sad to say, some British politicians. And it finished sadly, but necessarily with the military intervention, because that was the only way you could get Mr. Milosevic and his Serb machine to stop. It was necessary in Sarajevo earlier, and Kosovo was freed from Serb domination and control. And I often think of it in terms of Ireland, a country that my mother's side, my family comes from, that it too broke away from England, from British control. It fought a savage little war against the British. It then fought a very ugly civil war, but finally it was allowed to be free, and the British accepted that Ireland was not going to be ruled from London anymore, but you still have this permanent sense that Mr. Vučić and Serbia cannot accept the existence of Kosovo. And rather sadly, one or two other countries which really ought to know better say, oh, if we recognise Kosovo, Catalonia will be free. If we recognise Kosovo, our minorities in Hungary will suffer. A complete and utter nonsense. And there's this lack of historical perspective, I think, by too many people, too many leaders in the rest of Europe. And Kosovo is far from perfect, but It exists. It's a nice country. It's got lovely mountains, lovely food, lovely people. It's poor, but it should be allowed to become rich by becoming just a small member of the European community of nations.
And it does have a lot of problems. But if you look at various recent reports on Kosovo, things like media freedom, democracy, corruption, the rule of law, things are getting better. Like, from where I'm standing, they seem to be making a concerted effort to move things forward. And the same cannot be said for other countries in the region. As you mentioned, I would say Serbia, which is backsliding, where its population don't want to join the EU. It's less than half, whereas Kosovo, it's nearly 100% want to join the EU. And talking about the crimes you mentioned before in Serbia, you know, the atrocities they committed, the people who committed them are celebrated as heroes. And sort of accepted by the government. And I find this really, really confusing. Kosovo is doing everything right, but it's being sanctioned, although the EU prefers to use the term measures, whereas you have Serbia, which is doing everything wrong and has the door open. Come and join us. Do you think this is it? They want to bring Serbia closer because they're worried what happens if they don't?
Well, the big difference, of course, is that Mr. Putin invaded Ukraine by air, sea and land with a huge army, and the Ukrainians have been battling bravely with help from the democracies of the world to stop that invasion and reverse it if possible. And what I've noticed throughout this long life watching just geopolitics, the United States in particular loves to kind of collect countries and say, you're on our side, you're in Team USA, you're in Team Biden now, or Team Trump perhaps in the future. And what Mr. Vucic's done is very clever. He sent a modest amount of weapons via Bulgaria to Kyiv, to Mr. Zelensky, and then Serbia then can get listed as a country that's in the broad alliance against Putin. I'm sure he talked to Mr. Putin about this beforehand, and Putin said, oh, go ahead, do it, because we know you're really on our side, like Mr. Putin knows that Viktor Orban of Hungary is on his side. And Mr. Putin's main geopolitical ambition or objective is to weaken and break up the EU. He doesn't give a damn about NATO. I mean, NATO will be there. It could be there in 100 years' time. It's a military alliance. Yes, if there's fighting, NATO is relevant, but the decisions are taken in Berlin, in Paris, in London, in Rome, not really in Brussels. But what he doesn't want is Ukraine to become a bit like Spain in the 1980s, a nation of 40 million, quite corrupt, coming out of very, very bad political era, but bit by bit becoming more European, focusing on good business, unleashing investment, dealing with worst examples of corruption, letting its people and succeeding very well. And then if that Ukraine becomes a European EU country on Russia's frontier, Russia doesn't really have a frontier with the EU, with obviously Ukrainian and Russian being similar to some extent, so they can understand each other. Most Ukrainians will speak some Russian. And that is a terrible example to the people of Russia from Mr. Putin's point of view. I think it's a wonderful example to the people of Russia from the point of view of the people of Russia. That is why he invaded Ukraine. That is why he supported Brexit. That is why he supported Marine Le Pen. Mr. Putin's key object always is to weaken and divide the European Union.